And talk about the climate change you just mentioned. I mean, where do you watch the news on TV right now? You talk to other people in the industry, or you visit Champagne and talk to the champagne makers. They all mention that the climate change right now is a big issue in the region. How do you think that the climate change will affect Champagne and the champagne production?
It has already affected, so we see what is happening. And there are good and bad things with it. The good things right now is that it's so much easier to find mature grapes, which was a big problem before. So when it comes to volume, when it comes to non-vintage champagnes, when it comes to champagne early release, it's an advantage because you have more maturity and you don't need to use the second pressing and things like that. You got full maturity from the start, which is a good thing. The bad thing is, of course, that you will lack the freshness, the elegance, the stony minerality, those kind of vintages like we saw before with the 88, 66, 79s, and etc. They will be more and more rare. We are longing for vintages like that. You will have easier to make champagne every year, in most cases. But then you might as well, another part of the climatic change is extreme weather, which is also affecting and already started to do in a couple of years. It happened, but we don't know how often and how much damage it will make. It will be a difference. Sometimes that will happen. But I think the biggest issue is the lack of acidity and freshness. So far, not a big issue, because it's more like we have more mature vintages, less fresh, elegant ones. But we got more and more vintages tasting similar to 59, 47, the really 76, the really hot vintages, which are still among the best champagnes ever made. So we can have that kind of vintage, and you can age them for a long time, and they will be huge and big and great. But the diversity in styles, which is one of the things that I love about champagne myself, that will not be there. On the other hand, or part of this, it's definitely happening. It's no risk right now with the changes we have. It doesn't affect that much. Champagne is the richest wine region in the world by far. And it covers such a small surface, but the amount of money is a third of all money in the wine world, and it's just a half of percentage of the vineyards. So it's a tremendous rich, and not only the money part are rich, they're also rich in tradition and in knowledge. So there's a lot of money invested right now in thinking ahead. How can we protect ourselves against these problems that are already started a little bit, and they're very good at that. So they are taking a lot of precautions in different ways. To make it very simple, it is you harvest earlier, you protect the vines more in the shade in different ways, so you don't have as many hours of sun. You cut the vines in new ways to change this. There's parts. You're adding more from colder vineyards, which are situated in normally less good positioning. You're not searching for the strong south positioned vineyards as you might have been doing before. You can play around with those kind of things, and they're very good at it, and there are more things to do even in the vinification afterwards and so on, at the fermentation stages and how you age the champagnes as well. But it's reality, it's happening, and they are taking precautions and they're working with it. The next question should be for how long?
Yeah, exactly.
No one knows. I mean, how many degrees can they take? We don't know. What's the future? Somewhere, if everything is happening that it looks like right now, it will come to a point where it's too hot in Champagne, and other vineyards who are have started a little bit and will start more in colder climates will one day probably pass in terms of quality. But hopefully that's very, very far.
Exactly, just cross your fingers and...
We don't know, it might be in Sweden. It might be Öland and Gotland has got a very good soil, not as perfect. It's limestone, it's not chalk, but that's also good for this kind of grapes. You need to have the right angles in the hills, etc. So, and if the climate will be like in Andalusia or something like that, in Jerez, which we have similar vineyard, you probably can make still very good wines, but they will be still red and still white. The sparkling will not be fresh enough. But it's after our grandchildren.
Okay, so just like I said, cross our fingers. It's long time in the future. I've been across your website, champagneclub.com, and among a lot of different interesting things, I looked a little bit extra at the champagnes you have given the absolutely best scores for over the years. And in fact, there's only one that has received the magical 100 points. Do you remember which one it is?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, but it's we're living in a wine world dictated by Robert Parker points and Wine Spectator points. The American way of looking upon quality, where the figures are so high, starting from too high. For me, that's it was so natural for me from the start that if I want to judge something, I need to have some kind of scale where you can. It can always get better and not having them too close to each other. So I love 100%, 100-point scale. I think it's gorgeous, much better. When I was a teacher, I had this 5-grade scale. And sometimes it was too many on the third, and I felt, oh, it's almost a 4, but, you know. Yeah. And it's such a broad group. So I really agree on the Davis scale in terms of 100 points, because then you can choose between 81 and 82 and actually know approximately what it is. But when it actually starts from 88 and 90% of the wines are above 90 points, and you have Cavas scoring 92 points, then it's completely waste for me. So I've been very low. I think that even if my average score is not 50, which was the idea, it's higher because I taste better champagnes. But if I would taste everything from Champagne, all the non-vintages from the outskirts as well, I think I would have been very close to 50 points. And when I go to big tastings, especially decanter tasting in London, where we taste 650 champagnes in 3 days, my average score is 60, around there. Really? Yeah. Because there are so many unknown producers who are just sending in things, and they're really not, the majority are not good, to put it simple. But the things that I taste, of course, I'm searching for the holy grails. I'm searching for perfection. I'm drinking far more 95-point wines than 85-point wines when I drink myself, because I'm cherry picking myself, like everyone should be. When you enjoy, when you're not spitting and doing tastings like that. And so for me, I had 98 points for a couple of years on the highest. And then one day I tasted the Krug 38 and I felt it's slightly better. So it became the 99 point. For a couple of years, I don't recall exactly how many now, but let's say 6-7 years, that was the leading one. And I was working with an agent guy who told me, Richard, you're not allowed to put the 100-point score, because that's the perfect one. People would dream of obtaining that. So please promise me that you'll never. I said, I can't promise you, but I get your point. And probably nothing will be better. It might be 99 as well. Then I had 1 or 2 99 points again, equally good. But on one occasion, I actually met this wine before, because I met it together with Christian Paul Rocher, who just passed away last year. He showed me a lot of old bottles, and we shared the 11 in Magnum, the 14, and etc. And he brought the perfect bottles each time. But then he said, Richard, I have another wine, which I wouldn't say it's my best, but in some ways it's the most peculiar and special, because it's a 1928 Blanc de Blanc, which we never sold. It's from a single village. It's from Grove, which is a Premier Cru, not a Grand Cru. It was kept, just 200 bottles made. It was kept for a lot of years for blending into a dosage. Mm-hmm. But then they felt, oh, it's keeping quite well. Let's keep it to see what it will become. And in the 80s or something, they opened again and saw the color was paler than this. So it was some kind of blind tasting joke they put on to other people. And I especially recall when Henri Krug from Krug, Monsieur Montgolfier from Bollinger, and Christian Polloget, they had a small secret meeting, because it was always secret when, at that time, they didn't meet the different houses, but they did. They were friends. So they have a gathering of tasting, a comparison of 28 and 29. 28 more famous, but 29 almost equally good. So they brought magnums and regal bottles of the vintage wine, of those. And I remember that 29 Bollinger was the winner, he told me. But at the end, he brought this 1928 Grove as an extra bottle and said, what is this? Ooh, and they were guessing of something from the 70s. Wow. Very, very young. Beautifully flowery, but shy wine. Far too early to drink. And it was this wine. So he told me that story. And then I had, for the Millennium tasting that we had when we were having the 150 best champagnes ever made, was the idea anyway, directly from the producers. It participated back in 99. It didn't score that high. I had it very high in the blind tasting myself, but too young. In 99, 28. Beautifully floweriness, so much lime zest and lilies of the valley and those kind of aromas. Certain fatness, but too acidic, too sharp, if you compare it to some of the other wines in the same age. But that was the first bottle, because I bought one bottle in an auction, the only bottle that's ever been sold. I bought that one. That was the bottle we brought to the tasting. The second bottle that we received, I kept myself, because it was slightly later disgorgement on it. Yep. So I brought that for a dinner, a luxury dinner in Stockholm, where we tasted some of the absolutely best wines in the world. We were tasting 47 Cheval Blanc, 34 or 37 Romanée Conti, 59.
Sounds like a good evening.
I can go on. But many, many great names. And this was one of the least famous in this lineup or this dinner. And I remember we started with Celos 86. Beautiful. And then this comes in as glass number 2. And it was a great dinner, but I'm also working, because there were people paying guests, and you drink a little bit, you enjoy and you speak. But I took the glass and I started to cry. It was so emotional. It was something which I'd never seen before or after. It was every late disgorged old wine has a small window where it's perfect, and this bottle was perfect on that day. I'm quite certain that a week in both ways would not have been the same anyway. So it was just perfection on the day, and the combination between the youthfulness with the aromas that I spoke about, this flowery and citrus style, with a fat glycerol richness and smoothness, and an aftertaste that was as strong as it was when the first attack came. I've never seen that before. So that act of balance in liquid gold, that was so good. So my agent was sitting, don't say that. Yes, I was just nodding, okay, it's 100 points. And everybody who were there, tasted, and some guys were there just for a specific red wine, and were not so keen on champagne. We said, it's still the best wine they ever had.
Amazing experience.
Amazing, yeah.
Wow.
Magic.
And I mean, there is actually one common feature among the best champagnes that you have reviewed over the years. They all have age.
Yeah.
Or most of them has actually quite a lot of age also. So
I would say two things: age and youth. Mm-hmm. Because it's always the combination. It's the youngest old champagnes. That's the most beautiful thing you can obtain. If you still have this was extraordinary, the things I spoke about. Yeah. It's not always that you have citrus, lemony notes and flowery notes, white flowery notes in old champagnes that could be good. They could be extremely exotic, they could be very heavy, but they always, among the ones that I tasted with the very high scores, there's always a freshness. It's not always very lively, but it's always bubbles, at least a little bit of a string of bubbles, and it's always a freshness of acidity in combination with the fruit, and then it might be dominated by torrefaction or old notes secondary aromas that comes with age.
But is there any rules? How long can you actually store champagne?
There's one rule that you can see on these figures is that if you look at the Vinotech wines, because they're very often Vinotech coming directly from producer cellars, they could be very late disgorged or long time ago disgorged but kept in the producer cellars. The final result is very often the same in terms of quality. So as soon as the bottle is traveling around, it's very rarely they can rarely obtain the same quality. So that's the perfect way of doing it. And in my top lists, it's clearly dominated by that. But the only rule I can say is that the longer it keeps fresh, the higher is the potential of being really great. If it's great when it's around 100 years old, if it's still fresh, then the build-up of the wine is so special that the aromatic profile that has developed around that core of minerality and acidity is so special and so strong that you will obtain much more flavors and a better balance. So a champagne that will peak when it's 80 years old is always something very, very special. It's very rare to have, yes, it's still fresh, but it's not so interesting. And it's very rare as well to take vintages like early maturing ones that taste very good today. 92 is a good example. 99 is a good example. They are tremendous to drink today. They are fully matured, but they will never have this extra gear. They are just polished, round, fat, perfect balance, but a little bit shorter, a little bit less deep in their aromatic profile.
But even if they're perfect right now, would you say it's still able to store for another 10 years? Or
in perfect cellars, those vintages I say now, they are the 92s and the 99s, just to pick an example, but I drink a lot of them right now, just because of that. They will never become better. No one knows, but I think they will keep for another 10 years in good cellars, most of them. But it's perfect to drink them now. Don't risk to wait more than 2 years.
Just enjoy it now if it's perfect.
Yeah. And there's a risk. In 5 years' time, there's definitely a risk that they are not showing as well as they did. That is the case of the 82s and the 85s right now. More irregular. Just this Saturday, I had two tremendous 85s and one quite bad. One that usually is good. So that's where we are right now.